Welcome back to Morocco. I'm thrilled so many of you returned after our history lesson. Before we begin, I have one small correction and two updates. In the last session, I called the current king, Muhammad VI, the son of Muhammad V. He was the one who stood up for the Jews in World War II. In fact, Muhammad VI was his grandson. Muhammad VI's father was Hassan II. Hopefully, unless you've studied the succession of Moroccan kings, you didn't catch my error. Now the updates. Someone asked the question, are there any Jews today in the Moroccan government? I found only one, but a very prominent one. Andre Azoulay served as chief advisor to King Hassan II, and today serves as senior advisor to his son, Muhammad VI. In addition to his professional responsibilities, Andre Azoulay has always fought for peace and dialogue between the Arab Muslim world and that of the Jewish communities in Europe, the United States, and Morocco, as well as the Arab, Berber, and Jewish diasporas worldwide. As to the other question, when I did research about Jewish properties left behind in Morocco, I found that it was very complicated and I don't have a definitive answer. I will share the little I found out. Israel is suing 7 Arab countries for reparations for property confiscated when the Jews were forced to leave Morocco and the other countries. Even some Jews state that when it comes to Morocco, Israel is not looking at the facts. Jews were not forced to leave. In fact, Mossad came in and heavily recruited Jews, both in the 1920s and when Israel became a state. When we were in the town of Essaouira, which was once 60% Jewish, we saw Jewish homes and synagogues with big padlocks on the doors, and we were told that the Jews still own the homes. One odd article I found said that Jews were not allowed to sell their property. Again, it is confusing. After flying began in Casablanca. On the Atlantic Ocean, Casablanca is the country's primary harbor and one of the most significant economic centers in Africa. It was established by our friends the Berbers in the 7th century BCE and was utilized as a harbor by the Phoenicians and eventually the Romans. As early as the 7th century, the Berbers called the city Anva. When the Portuguese took control in the 15th century, they changed the name to Casablanca, meaning White House. And when the Portuguese were assimilated into Spanish culture, the name became Spanish, Casablanca. Out of a population of 20,000 at the beginning of the 20th century, there were about 6,500 Jews, almost 1/3 of the population. With 2 synagogues, 8 Talmud Torahs, and 4 private schools. Today, most of Morocco's Jews live in Casablanca. When you hear the name Casablanca, you probably think of the movie, which, although is a wonderful classic film, has dozens and dozens of errors, including many historical inaccuracies. For example, Victor Laszlo, Ingrid Bergman's husband in the movie, has escaped from a German concentration camp. He is an enemy of the state. In reality, the Germans would have arrested him on sight. In the movie, they try to find a reason to arrest him, not necessary. The letters of transit, which play a big part in the movie, were signed by de Gaulle, who had no authority in Vichy France. They would have been worthless. My favorite, no uniformed German troops were stationed in Morocco during World War II. They let the French do all the dirty work. Yet think back on the scene where the crowd sings the French national anthem in defiance of the German soldiers. With all its errors, it's still an unforgettable movie. The second famous quote that makes us think of Morocco is the sexy, "Come with me to the Kasbah," a line from Pepe Le Moko, a film from the 30s about a French gangster who hides out in the Kasbah. If you were with me last Sunday, you already know what a Kasbah is, a fortified building or town. Our boutique hotel was a hidden jewel on a very quiet side street in the Mellah, the old Jewish quarter. Although I couldn't verify it, I was told it once was the home of a Jewish family. So at the very start of our trip, I had found a Jewish connection. Each room was in a different style, named after a famous person of the 1920s. Dan and I were sleeping with Coco Chanel. When we arrived at 11 p.m., the staff insisted on serving us dinner, and since it was included, we stayed awake to enjoy it. Before beginning our Jewish tour, we stopped at the Hassan II Mosque, a spectacular structure. It is the largest functioning mosque in Africa. At 689 feet, its minaret is the world's second tallest, so tall that there are elevators to get to the top. This is one of two mosques open to non-Muslims in Morocco, and the only one in the world on the water. Our last day in Morocco was Ramadan, and we viewed the mosque at night with thousands of people praying inside and out. The mosque is truly magnificent. The wooden ceiling of cedar can open to the sky for natural light and air. The giant chandeliers are of Murano glass. Ornately carved pillars camouflage loudspeakers. The inside doors are made of titanium, which can withstand sea air. Okay, you're probably wondering why I'm going on and on about a mosque. Believe it or not, there is a Jewish connection. The Jews of Morocco donated money to the creation of the building. Now on to the Jewish section. Casablanca's Mellah, which is relatively new compared to other Mellahs in Morocco, only about a century old, is, I don't know what I want to say. Today, most of Casablanca's Jews live outside the Mellah, but inside it, there still are kosher butcher shops and the main synagogue. Morocco once had over 250 synagogues. Today, Casablanca has about 5 to 6, the greatest number of any city in the country. Beth El, where most Jews worship, is considered the centerpiece of a once vibrant Jewish community in Casablanca. Now, the research I did on the number of Jews was very confusing. In many sources, I read that there are only 2,500 Jews in all of Morocco, but other sources said that 5,000 Jews live in Casablanca. The math doesn't add up. One source contradicted itself with 2,100 Jews in Morocco, but 3,000 in Casablanca. I'm still trying to figure out what number is correct. Normally, when we visit synagogues around the world, the security is very tight, including armed guards, metal detectors, and the need to show our passports. Many times we are not allowed in unless we've made prior arrangements. The security in Casablanca was minimal. We rang a bell and were immediately let in. An old woman in a white jalaba sat inside the entrance in a lovely courtyard with yahrzeit plaques on 2 walls. Refurnished in 1997, the sanctuary has beautiful stained glass windows in the style of Chagall, crystal chandeliers, and cedar carved ceilings. Consistent with Sephardic tradition, the bima is in the center. The caretaker and our guide was a Jewish man, which is unusual in Morocco. He spoke no English, but we were able to communicate with him somewhat in French. We thought he was telling us we couldn't take any photos, but then realized that he wanted us to take his photo. So you can see the picture on the far left where he's posing for us. He blessed each one of us individually, putting his hand on the men and boys, but of course, not on Debbie or me. You can see the distance between us in the photo. When it was time to bless Noah, who was only 16, he asked if he were married. We all laughed and said no. In his blessing, he prayed that Noah would find a good wife, to which we all said, Amen. Only in Morocco could we find the name of a synagogue written in both Hebrew and Arabic. In fact, throughout Morocco, signs for all Jewish sites were in both languages, and sometimes even in Berber. We next visited another synagogue, smaller and simpler, but just as lovely, with beautiful sky blue tiles. I call it the no-name synagogue because even after doing tons of research and contacting our tour company and our guide, I found out that it had no name. The caretaker was a Muslim woman who had lived in the Mellah her whole life. When Noah entered the sanctuary without a head covering, she cuffed him on the arm and handed him a kippah. She was not only the caretaker of the synagogue, but she was also the caretaker of Jewish traditions. The women had to worship outside with almost opaque windows looking into the sanctuary. Most of us are accustomed to mixed seating in our synagogues, or at least just a dividing aisle. When I travel outside of the US, it is more common to find completely separated sections for men and women. While the concept of this division bothers me as a modern woman, I somehow accept it in other cultures. That's just the way it is. Our next stop was the only Jewish museum at the time in an Arab country. Another one opened in 2020 in a Moroccan seaside town we visited at the end of our trip. You'll hear more about it in the next session. These two handsome men greeted me at the entrance. The curator, an Arab woman, gave us a personal tour. She has degrees in anthropology and archaeology, and although not Jewish, has always been fascinated by Moroccan Jewish culture. Throughout Morocco, we found this interest by many Muslims in all things Jewish. In the first room was a tall silver menorah with pomegranates as candle holders. Pomegranates are traditionally eaten on Rosh Hashanah because they supposedly have 613 seeds, I've never counted them, corresponding to the 613 commandments of the Torah. Along the walls were pictures about 24 synagogues currently being restored in Morocco, one of the goals of the current king. The most fascinating section was an exhibit on Jewish clothing. Jewish women wore typical Moroccan dress, especially for their weddings. I discovered an interesting custom, Berberiska dress, which forms part of the traditional costume of Sephardi brides in northern Morocco. It is not a wedding dress, but is rather worn by the bride at a celebration known as Noche de Paños, or Henna Night. Particular to northern and Spanish Morocco, the Henna Night takes place before the wedding and brings together the families and friends of the bride and groom to sing the praises of the bride. A very popular item of clothing is the jalaba, long, loose-fitting outer robe with long sleeves. Everyone wears them. They can be a simple cotton with plain colors or stripes, or they can be very colorful and elaborate with beautiful embroidery. Jewish men and women, even rabbis, wear the long kaftans. The Jewish Museum in Casablanca was our last stop before we headed off to fabulous Fez. But first, this is important. A big worry when I travel is what will the restroom facilities be like? Before we leave Casablanca and set out on our journey, I want to reassure you that for the most part, they were modern and clean, kept this way by attendants whom you pay as you go. Debbie and I had one interesting encounter. It is very hard to find change in Morocco. We literally begged for it in restaurants and stores, but to no avail. At a lunch stop, Debbie and I headed for the loo, apologizing to the attendant in French that we had no money. She was not happy. She snarled at us, saying, "Les Américains," and refused to give us a hand towel. So we had to drip dry. When we needed to make a return trip, because we drank a lot of mint tea in Morocco, we asked our guide if he could pay her and put it on our tab. I don't know how much he gave her, but she handed us towels, turned on the water, flushed the toilet, and kissed Debbie on both cheeks. And this is a true story. With the bathroom situation under control, we were ready for Fez. Fez is fabulous, fascinating, and filled with delights. The word Fez is derived from the Arabic word faz, which means pickaxe. You might wonder how the name came about. Legends say Idris I of Morocco, remember him with the Arab conquest? He was the first Arab king. He used a gold and silver pickaxe when he created the lines of the city. Fez is the oldest of the four ancient imperial or capital cities in Morocco, in addition to Meknes, Marrakesh, and Rabat. Now I'm going to talk about riads. If you go to Morocco, you have to stay in riads. A riad is a traditional Moroccan house with an interior courtyard. The riads used for tourists today were originally homes of the wealthy and of the nobility. The word riad comes from the Arabic term for garden. An important design concern was the Islamic notion of privacy for women inside residential garments. Our riad in Fez, appropriately named Fez Riad, was like something out of the Arabian Nights. To get to it, we had to pass through narrow, winding, not terribly appealing passageways, wondering, where in the world are we going? But then we walked inside, and it was a Morocco palace with columns, mosaics, tile floors, and fountains. Our room was fit for a harem. Although it was a very touristy thing to do, we all had to buy and wear fez in Fez, and they cost just about $1. Before we explore Fez, let's look at two new vocabulary words. Souk is the marketplace, probably within the Medina, and dhimmi were people under the rule of Muslims, but protected and allowed to follow their faith. Jews were considered dhimmi. The Jewish quarter of Fez, the Mellah, is the oldest in Morocco, built in 1438, over 50 years before the discovery of America. The Mellah at first consisted of Jews from another section of Fez, who were soon joined by the Berber Jews from the Atlas Mountains and Jewish immigrants from Spain. The Jewish population lived under the protected but subordinate status of dhimmi, required to pay a tax, but able to move relatively freely and cultivate relations in other countries. Fez was one of the centers of a Jewish intellectual cultural renaissance taking place in the 10th and 11th centuries in Morocco and southern Spain. Wandering the streets of the souk, we found an antique store selling many items of Judaica. Debbie and I each bought handmade oil-burning menorahs. Hers was supposedly over 120 years old. Throughout Morocco, we found Jewish artifacts everywhere: big cities, small towns, the Atlas Mountains, and the Sahara Desert. I'm guessing these pieces were sold or left behind during the mass exodus of Jews in the first half of the 20th century. They definitely looked old and original. Grant discovered the center bowl in a Berber town on the edge of the Sahara Desert. We honestly didn't know it was made in China, but it sure looked old and authentic. You have to look carefully at these pictures. We continued through the mazes of the Medina, and these pictures illustrate how very narrow the streets are. If you look at the top middle of both pictures, you will see me nearly crushed by a donkey. It was almost death by ass. I was literally flat against the wall. By the way, I think there are more donkeys than people in Morocco. They are used both for transportation and as beasts of burden. The one in the picture is carrying leather pelts. Nearby was a stable sheltering horses and donkeys for the night. I think it was the only place in Morocco where I had to hold my nose. It didn't matter where we were, we saw donkeys. Unfortunately, they did not appear to be very well treated. Somehow, I don't think they have an SPCA in Morocco, but they sure need one. Within the Mellah was the Emanu-El Synagogue, dating from the 17th century and one of the most important synagogues in all of North Africa. Originally built by a prominent Sephardic family going back 50 generations, it is still privately owned. It was renovated at the end of the 19th century and again in 1995. Congregates at the Danan were Megorashim. Remember, these were the Jews expelled from Spain who had a different language, liturgy, and place of worship from the Toshavim, the Jews who had lived in Morocco before their arrival. You know the old story, 2 Jews, 3 synagogues. We entered the synagogue through a simple doorway, indistinguishable from the doors of nearby houses. The door led immediately to a short flight of stairs that went into the high rectangular space of the beautiful sanctuary. The large ark on the left filled the width of an entire wall and is made of carved wood. The wall above is decorated with intricately carved plaster work. Opposite the ark is a raised alcove separated from the main prayer space by a wooden screen carved with a series of arches. It was intended as a seating area for the congregation's more distinguished members. The wooden bema is accessed from this space, constructed as a small platform cantilevered out from the raised area. It is topped by a wrought iron canopy of Islamic-style arches and floral forms with a crown at its top. Debbie and I looked down from the women's section, again, very much separated from the main sanctuary. In the back was a trap door to reveal the mikvah, which is no longer in use, thankfully. It was dark and dank. This cemetery is absolutely fascinating. It was not like any I've ever seen anywhere else in the world. It was a sea of blinding white, rounded tombs stretching down the hillside. Today, it is even more blinding since the above-ground graves were repainted in 2019. If you go to Morocco, make sure you wear your sunglasses when you visit the cemetery. At the entrance was a sign in French and Hebrew with a prayer to recite upon entering if you had not been in the cemetery for more than 30 days. It's very loosely translated, but it states, "Blessed are you, our God, King of the universe, who designed you with justice, who nourished you with justice, who has held you with justice, who has kept you alive with justice, who has condemned you to death with justice, who knows everyone, who brings you back with justice, and you will rise up with justice and see life in the future. Blessed are you, Hashem, for bringing back the dead." Inside was a large basin for hand washing. Look carefully to the top right of the basin, and you will see a sign which, when translated, turned out to be most unusual. I asked my French-speaking friend and neighbor, Leslie Kramer, to help translate this sign. When she told me it was a conversation between Cleopatra and a rabbi, I said, oh, no, that can't be. With the magic of Google, I found out that indeed there is a connection. In the Talmud, Cleopatra asked Rabbi Meir, one of the greatest rabbis of his time, when the dead are resurrected, will they come back clothed or naked? Rabbi Meir answers by using an analogy to the seed of wheat, saying, it is buried without covers, but when it arises, it has many covers. He continued, the righteous are buried with their garments, shrouds. For certain, they will be resurrected with their garments. Very traditional Jews do believe in resurrection. When the Messianic age comes, the temple will be built and the dead will be reunited with their bodies. Jews certainly do not believe in the afterlife in the manner of the Egyptians. I really don't have a clue what this is all about. Please don't ask me questions, but I found it fascinating that Cleopatra is in the Talmud. The tombs of the chief rabbis were within a special blue enclosure. One of the oldest, I love this name, Rabbi Hasarfati, or Hasarfati, I like to call him. He died in 1600. Near or as part of the tombs were small fireplaces used to light yahrzeit candles, the ovens being a Sephardic tradition. And from all the ashes we saw, they were very much still used. A black and white tomb belonged to Rabbi Yehuda ben Attar, who was imprisoned by the Sultan in order to raise ransom money. The Jewish community had already been taxed to the point that they had no money left, so the rabbi was thrown to the lions. When he began to pray, the lions sat quietly in a row as if they were his students. The apparent miracle earned him his freedom and the Sultan's apology. On the slope below, a large tomb with green trimming was that of a young Jewish martyr, Solika. There are many spelling variations of her name, and there are also many variations of her story told in different ways by the Jews and by the Muslims. In 1834, she refused to convert to Islam or accept the advances of the governor, and subsequently had her throat slit. Muslim women, as well as Jews, venerate her for her steadfastness. Jews do not have saints in the Christian sense, people who perform miracles. Saintly Jews may be those who are devoted to God and Torah, or who have sacrificed their lives for God. Probably the most famous Jew who lived in Fez was Maimonides, the foremost intellectual figure of medieval Judaism. After leaving Cordoba to escape religious persecution, Maimonides settled in Fez, where he studied at the university. During this time, he composed his acclaimed commentary, the Mishneh Torah, in the years 1166 to 68. This code of Jewish law is the only medieval work detailing Jewish observance. I love this next part. You're going to love it too. Maimonides would probably roll over in his grave to find out that his home in Fez has been turned into a Chinese Moroccan restaurant. I wonder if Jews go there on Christmas. By the way, it gets excellent reviews. We unfortunately didn't know about it and didn't get to eat there. The three main industries in Fez are pottery tile works, rug making, and leather tanning. The pottery facility was fascinating. We were able to see the entire process from beginning to end. Olive pits are used in the kiln to increase the heat. Men painstakingly chip tiles into various shapes. One man was making a huge table by placing the tiles upside down in a pattern. Finally, two men and a woman were using small brushes to paint pottery vases. The results were beautiful, but very, very expensive. Surprisingly, they had a lot of Jewish objects, menorahs, mezuzahs, and hamsas. But it was the leather factory that was the highlight of craft making in Fez. Chuara Tannery from the 11th century is one of the oldest tanneries in the world. Men wearing protective boots work with vats filled with a corrosive mixture of cow urine, quicklime, water, and salt, all of which help to break down the tough leather and remove the hair from the hides. The hides are then soaked in another set of vats in a mixture of water and pigeon poop, which contains ammonia and acts as a softening agent that allows the hides to become malleable so they can absorb the dye. The tanner uses his bare feet to knead the hides for up to 3 hours. Finally, men stand in rows and rows of colored vats dyeing the leather. I now own a pair of urine-soaked, pigeon-pooped house shoes. For those of you who are fans of The Amazing Race, this was a stop on their trip around the world. It was hard to leave fabulous Fez, but we were on our way to marvelous Marrakesh. Marrakesh is known for the lifestyles of the rich and famous. We went by a hotel that had rooms charging $10,000 a night. Our grandsons wanted to know what you get for that amount. As diplomatically as we could, we said you probably got your own girlfriend. The region of Marrakesh has been inhabited by Berber farmers since Neolithic times. At the base of the Atlas Mountains, the city was founded in 1070 as the capital of the Almoravid Empire. In the 12th century, the Almoravids built many mosques and madrasas, Quranic schools. The red walls of the city, built in 1122, and various buildings constructed in red sandstone had given the city the nickname of the Red City of Africa. Riyad Khanisa was inside the very large Medina. As with all the riads, our van could not drive to the front door, so porters met us with a wooden cart. We followed them through a local market with sides of meat hanging from hooks, a display of goat and lamb's feet with hooves attached, live chickens huddled in cages, beautiful fruit and vegetables, fresh baked bread and pastries, and best of all, the spices with their enticing aromas. Yes, you are looking at a camel's head for sale in the meat market. Riyad Khanisa was built in the 1700s with beautiful tiled floors and walls, wood and dome ceilings, intricate carvings of stucco, and a swimming pool. It is an oasis in the hustle and bustle of the Medina. We had two-room suites with large carved wooden doors and huge metal ornate Moorish locks. Low couches lined our living room with a bowl of fruit on the coffee table. After resting in these luxurious surroundings, we were ready for the sights of Marrakesh. Jemaa el-Fnaa is the largest square in Africa. This is where the famous snake charmers are located. I have a severe phobia when it comes to snakes. Dan, Debbie, and I stayed at least 40 feet away, yet for me it was still too close. But Leo, Noah, and Grant went right up to them until the snake charmer tried to put a deadly viper around Leo's shoulders. I'm sure the snake was defanged, but that didn't make us feel more comfortable. I was not going to include a picture of the snakes, but Debbie insisted. Warning. Close your eyes if you don't want to see the next slide. My eyes are closed too. The boys settled for a picture with a tamer animal. If your eyes are closed, I'll describe it. It shows both boys with live monkeys on their heads. You can open your eyes now. The souk in Marrakesh was the best of all that we visited, an assault on the five senses. Many hire a guide to take them through the maze-like streets. Without our guide, we literally would have been lost. Marrakesh's Mellah was historically composed of residential homes, merchant warehouses, stables, and accommodations for merchants and travelers, with shopping streets and souks that sold spices. Above all, a place of business and trade. We wandered the streets of the Mellah and found the Lizama Synagogue. The original Lizama Synagogue at this site dated from 1492. The current one was built at the beginning of the 20th century. The picturesque setting is still used for weddings and bar mitzvahs, mainly by foreigners. The name Lizama is taken from al-Azma, which refers to those who ran away, meaning the Jews from Spain. We entered through a large white courtyard where curtains provided privacy for the family who lives there. Beautiful handmade tiles covered many of the walls between the curtains. Built in Moroccan tradition around a courtyard, it was a hidden spot in the Mellah. In fact, comments on TripAdvisor describe it as very hard to find. In addition to being a synagogue, back in the day, it also served as a place of Jewish learning for children from all over the area, with many students coming from the Atlas Mountains and boarding with Marrakesh families. There are still religious services there, weekdays and Saturday mornings. The caretaker, not Jewish of course, opened the ark for us. Around the room, filled with beautiful artifacts, were prayers written in Hebrew in lovely designs. It was a magical moment when my 14-year-old grandson read the prayers aloud to me in Hebrew. Here we were at the site of a synagogue dating from the Inquisition, and because he was Jewish, he could share a moment with Jews of long ago. However, when Debbie went to take his picture, he acted like a typical teenager. Neatly placed around the room were talit, prayer shawls, phylacteries, boxes with leather straps used in prayer, and prayer books. At the very back of the room was a shallow basket with books and papers. I always look for old Haggadot whenever I travel. Even though it wasn't a whole Haggadah, I was thrilled to find 4 torn pages written in French. I wanted to buy the few pages, but my family thought it would be rude to ask. I did anyway, using my limited French, and the caretaker said I could just have them. I read the French, which began, "We were strangers in the land of Egypt." To close this presentation, I'm going to go back to the warm connection between Muslims and Jews in Morocco. I'm not naive. I'm sure there is anti-Semitism in the country. A fact of life is that anti-Semitism exists and has existed and will always exist everywhere in the world. But the following story gives me a glimmer of hope. At the synagogue we just visited in Marrakesh, Yael Eckstein, an Orthodox Israeli who represented the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, distributed food parcels to Muslims for Ramadan. The Muslim bellboy at her hotel told her, quote, "Jews were in Morocco 600 years before Muslims. This is your home." Pointing to a picture on the wall of the Atlas Mountains, he continued, "Your people were here long before mine." Yael went on to say, "Moroccans are genuine in their love and respect for the Jewish people. I nearly cried when I saw how well the locals preserved the Jewish cemetery." When she asked a Muslim teen, "Why do you treat the Jews so well?" he replied, "Why wouldn't we?" Indeed, Morocco is one of the few places where Christians, Muslims, and Jews coexist in peace and mutual respect. I hope you can see why the big cities of Casablanca, Fez, and Marrakesh were beyond my expectations. But it was in the outlying areas that I learned what it was really like to be a Moroccan Jew. Come with me next Sunday as we journey across the Atlas Mountains to the Sahara to the sea. Would you believe goats climbing trees? Stay tuned.